Did you know that you are wonderfully weird? You've been created to be as unique and one of a kind as your fingerprint, fearfully and wonderfully made, created in the image of God. My name is John Waters, and over the next few minutes, Drake Hunter, senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, and author of the book Wonderfully Weird, now available through Westbow Press, will help you learn more about your own wonderful weirdness. Now, Wonderfully Weird Living. We are back once again on Wonderfully Weird Living. I am John Waters, your host. Joining me here in the studio once again, author, pastor, speaker, pretty good guy too, Drake Hunter. Hello there, sir.
Hello, and happy, is it Cinco de Mayo?
It is. As we record this, it's May the 5th, so it is Cinco de Mayo.
Yes.
So happy Cinco de Mayo.
It feels good.
Yeah. And of course, Mother's Day coming up this Sunday. We also want to talk about that just a brief moment, how important mom is.
Yeah, and especially where we're at, we're so excited because I'll let you announce it here in a second, but the direction that we're going, where we're going to be on Mother's Day, just a few days from now. So I'm extremely excited for so many different reasons. But yeah, mom, it's a time to celebrate mom, I should say.
Absolutely. Well, and as you mentioned, Elevating Life Church, where you're the senior pastor, we are doing drive-in church
That's right.
This Sunday. I know other churches have already been doing this. We've now gotten everything in place to where we're able to do that with an FM transmitter and all that sort of thing, and something new and exciting for us that we're really, really looking forward to.
Yeah, it's going to be different for me. I don't think I've ever, preach from a platform. What is it going to be, a flatbed truck coming in and into like a drive-in situation? That should be interesting. I used to love that experience when I was a kid, the drive-in theater kind of experience. So that should be fun because that's one memory I do have with my mom. Of course, my mom's still with us, but as a young child going to the drive-in, and I remember the first movie John ever saw in the drive-in. It was what was that old cowboy? I had it on the tip of my tongue, and I just lost it. I lost it. It was Gene Wilder.
Oh, yes.
Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles.
That's it. Oh, yeah. And that one scene around the campfire, I don't have to explain it. To this day, that's one of the funniest, most appreciated scenes I have in my own memory when it comes to movies, but also with my mom, because we used to go often to those drive-in theaters.
Yeah, absolutely. Something lost that I wish we would get back, the drive-in theaters.
That's right.
Anyway, we're going to have that experience this Sunday. So if you're in the Fort Morgan, Colorado area and you don't have another place to go, come join us. We would love to have you. Well, this week we want to talk about communication. Wow, what a topic. And I mean, this is a topic that could fill volumes and volumes and volumes. And we could do every podcast on communication. And in some ways we do. I mean, that's always a part of it. But we want to narrow it down a little bit to effective communication. And so there are three aspects of that you have identified to me that I thought we would use as our talking points, if you will, for today. And I want to throw those out there first, and then we're going to turn it over and start digging into each one of those. But the first element of effective communication, both got what they wanted, a moment of healthy emotional connection, a tangible result in that. Number two, both have been understood from each of their own point of view and can communicate it back to the other, proving that understanding. And then the third element of effective communication, the other person that you're communicating with seems fine with the exchange.
Yes.
Okay. So those are the elements. Again, volumes could be written on each one of those, but we're going to try to narrow them down a little bit. But so let's talk about effective communication from a healthy standpoint, and where both people can walk away from that exchange feeling like not only have they been heard, but we have some sort of an agreement now.
Yes. Well, with my responsibilities as a preacher, of course, father and all that, but we'll stay in the context of church and my responsibilities as a preacher. When I'm putting together a message, these are the three elements of communication I try to hit every every message, because I want to make sure that the message that I'm responsible for is effective. And of course, as you're reading through each one of these and you just kind of put together the little pieces, there's not much there. There's just 3 expectations or 3 effective pieces to our communication. You can understand, simply, basically, it's not that difficult to understand. So we have three, let's say you just revealed these 3 expectations, if you will, or
Elements.
ways to look at me. I'm stuttering. I can't. Maybe this is planned, but I don't know. No. So yeah, it's about effective communication, isn't it, John? We have to have effective communication, or we're just spinning our wheels.
Okay, so let's kind of take it out to the 30,000-foot view here a little bit when it comes to effective communication. And it seems to me like in order to even be in the ballpark of effective communication, first of all, I have to have a pretty good idea who I am, and I also have to have at least a decent idea of who you are.
Yes. And that's exactly the verse we used on Sunday with that message, failure to communicate, which we took that phrase out of Cool Hand Luke. And of course, what we have here is a failure to communicate. Hey, John, I'm going to ask you to do that because you did it so well on Sunday. Can you repeat that phrase as it said in Cool Hand Luke?
Yeah, and I actually watched it again yesterday, and I was doing it a little bit wrong.
Okay.
But he says, what we got here is failure to communicate.
Yes, and that's exactly right. So the verse we used, here's Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, right, verse 22, where he says, I become all things to all people. Very familiar verse by the Christians, but he understood that person across from us was different than he was. Not only in their design, but also in their makeup, in the sense of what they've been taught through their conditioning, through their different relationships, and also through their experiences, both good and bad. He was very aware of who was in front of him, and he knew how to listen. Well, when you can listen and you can really, let's say, encode the information that's coming in, is that the right term? Mm-hmm. Decode. Mm-hmm. Excuse me, the encode is going out, the decode coming in. And so with that, he listened. But when you listen, then you can give a message back that the person can understand equally, well, hopefully, where that we both got what we want. A moment of healthy emotional connection, because isn't that what togetherness is all about? I preach often, what are the different elements of togetherness or bonding? Well, 1 is paying attention together. Number 2 is understanding together. Mm-hmm. Number 3 is feeling together, shared feelings, and number 4 is that rhythm that we need. So togetherness. So yes, it's so important to understand who's in front of you, and then you then can become weak, if you will. I'm messing that up. I become weak to those who are weak.
Right.
Or maybe you don't have all of the elements that is that you don't have or whatever I'm trying to say there with this ironic podcast
where we're
with
having
communication.
A failure to communicate. Yeah. And really,
I think it's in my head. It's getting in my head here.
And really, that's what your book, Wonderfully Weird, really is all about, is that becoming all things to all people. But in order to do that, you have to understand who they are.
Yes.
First, you have to understand who you are, then understand who they are, not only, as you said, from the way God has created them, but also what is their history? What's their background? What's their family script? What's their experience? And all of that goes into the mix then to make the stew that is the other person.
And appreciating who they are with all of that together, in the sense of truly their experience, why they're in front of you in the first place.
Well, and like you and I mean, we're on the same page for the most part, but you have different experiences. You grew up in California.
Yes.
I grew up in Nebraska. Yeah. You were in the military. I was not. We have different experiences. So I have to then put aside my experience when you're talking and listen to it from your point of view, not with the glasses that I would wear from my perspective, but trying to wear the glasses you would wear.
I put it this way, to respect the differences. Because oftentimes we misunderstand it. Don't we fight over the differences? There's 3 Ds of the devil. The way I explain it is you got the differences, disagreements, and disorder. But it's those it's those differences that really can cause a lot of issues when we don't respect one another or understand one another in the sense of exactly what you shared in the teachings and all of that, relationships and experience. But as well, the differences when it comes to who you are and how God designed you. Because, for instance, you in the sense of the Myers-Briggs symbols, NT. I'm an NF. In my book, you're the eagle. I'm the man symbol, if you will, in the sense of Ezekiel and Revelation and what the Bible shares with regards to temperament or that image, that greatness of God that sits in the foundation of who you are. And when we don't understand that, differences, things then divide. Then we live in conflict rather than in contrast, which when we're in contrast, we're not compromising, we're having good communication where rather than being in conflict, we are bringing that together and we can agree one way or the other, as we were talking about yesterday, where you can be in agreement, but oftentimes disagreement, and you're both okay with it. Right. That's that third piece there that you shared. So that's the challenge, isn't it? Because Jesus did come so that we would be in agreement, both outside of the church and inside of the church. He came for the entire world. He died for the entire world for that reason.
Well, another important aspect of communication that you brought out in your message on Sunday, grace and truth.
Yes.
Those two things together help make effective communication. If you're stuck on one side or the other, then it's a barrier.
Yes, and to be honest, isn't that the most fundamental aspect of communication we need to understand? Because when we understand grace and truth and how they work together to bring into one focus, then we have that in contrast, and then we can get into our purpose through the grace and truth working together, rather than what we see often in our society, in our churches, is we've created a dichotomy where you have grace on one side or you have truth on the other side. They're not coming together. They're just going to sit in isolation, and then they become their own little fellowships, let's say, and then with that, they become closed off. And as we know, and even in the science today, anything that's closed off in itself is going to die. And so grace and truth must work together, and we see this with Jesus, of course, in 1 John 1:14, very familiar verse, that the flesh, or the Word became flesh, and he was full of grace and truth all the time.
Right.
And so, yes, my biggest concern, John, let me throw something. Something came to mind. My biggest concern is, if somebody would walk into the human experience, let's put it this way. Let me give you a little story. Let's say you and I go back to 1992. We're both investigators in the Air Force. We're working in the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, and we have a responsibility, and we're going to go and we're going to investigate, let's say, the world to find out who the true God is of this world. Now, if we went out there and we examined, we really, really got into it and put our notes together, you would see, in the sense of the world's way of understanding God or religion, you'd see not one God, but two gods. You would have, on one side, a God of grace, and on the other, a God of truth. And they're completely divided. So when we're like that, we're not one. We have two gods, and when we have two gods, it's no different than what we see in the Scripture and the Greek and the Greek, all the folks in the Scripture there, where they have all their different gods and stuff. And we don't have two gods; we only have one God, and they must come together in that grace, in that truth, where together we can truly have activity where they come together, where we're focused, we have direction, we're aligning ourselves with those boundaries, where we're truly doing something in our faith for the Lord. So going back to that story, you would really see that. And it's kind of a challenge because it's a mentality that we have to resolve if we're going to come together. It's not about being fundamentalist. It's not about being, so liberal or charismatic, or right. It's about figuring it out together through effective communication, where we can truly figure it out, where we can live together, and that we can live in the fulfillment and satisfaction of how God designed life to be. That's the whole goal. And so we have to figure out this grace and truth. Otherwise, we're going to be divided, and we're always going to be in conflict rather than in contrast, and we'll never, ever find the purpose of what the overall general purpose, but also the specific purpose that we find through our own personal relationship as well. So it's a challenge, and of course I brought that out with the two sides of grace and truth with the prodigal son story out of Luke 15, where we have not one prodigal son, we have two prodigal sons in that particular parable, that story that Jesus shared. And the lesson is grace, truth. It's not about the two prodigal sons, it's actually about the prodigal God that Timothy Keller shares in his book titled The Prodigal God. It's brilliant.
By the way, one of us was a special investigator in the Air Force in 1992. One of us was not. I was not. Just thought I'd throw that out there so that folks understood that.
I was an assistant investigator. Yeah, whatever that title was. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, when it comes to communication, I think most of us I put myself squarely in this pot over here, spend more time with the conversation going in our head about what I'm going to say next, rather than actually listening and hearing what the other person is saying.
Oh, and that's typical, isn't it? How do we tune out those voices, the semantic noise that's in your head, we'll say psychological noise, not only your head, but the other person's head, and truly listen? Because you also have another noise, physical noise going on as well. And so to listen is having the ability to get the noise reduced or out of there the best you can, so that you can truly listen through the different channels of information that's coming to you, or traveling back and forth in the sense of the receiver and the messenger, the message and the receiver and all that, everything that goes with that. I believe it's called the interchangeable model, whatever that is out there. It's been a while since I've really looked at that, but there's different models. But that noise, another word for noise, can I give the devil? Yeah. Because we have a lot of that would be another branch of, but that noise where you have the physical noise, psychological noise, and semantic noise. Let's say semantic noise is just speaking over somebody, the one up, one down mentality with our language, and people are like, I don't know what you just said, man.
Well, and you use the word there, inter, and let's go that direction a little bit, because there are two different conversations going on quite often. There's the intra communication that's going on, that conversation I'm having with myself.
Yes.
As well as the intercommunication that's going on, which is the conversation I'm having with you.
Yes.
And unfortunately, both of them are going quite often at the same time. And then it becomes, which of those conversations am I going to pay attention to and put effort into?
Right, and depending on the circumstances and situation, because sometimes you just need to go and park yourself in a very independent place, if you will, like we see Jesus do in the garden, and have that intra-personal communication with God. And that's the challenge, isn't it? Because when we're by ourselves and we're communicating all the time if we're awake, we're communicating, we say with ourselves, but that's actually communicating with God. That's why we have to get the commands of Christ into our memory, into our heart, because then as we're having this communication with the voices in our head, then we have a point of reference that we can discern and say, okay, which direction should I go, and what voice am I going to pay attention to? Or if you're a Christian, first and foremost, your perspective sits established in the sense of God the Father. But when it comes to problem solving, this is where those 49 commands come in and say, okay, I need to resolve some things and let me work this out in my own thought. Now, with that though, transitioning to the intercommunication where you and I are communicating, those commands now sit in your heart, and now you can kind of step away. You don't have to wait for that moment to say what you want, because you're going to listen. And when you say something and I can help and you give me permission, that triggers that command that's in my heart. Then I can offer a service to you or provide, my ministry to you, going, hey, let me help you out here in the sense of whatever resolve that you might need through those commands or through those experience that we see through the stories and the parables and all that.
Well, and that comes back to something we talked a little bit about last week here on the podcast, where Jesus was being tempted by the devil in the wilderness, and he didn't answer from his own perspective. He answered from the Father's perspective and said, this is, from Scripture, the Father's word. Yeah. This is how I answer that. Yeah. And that's what we would do then with the commands of Christ.
Yeah, he answered with truth rather than we can compare it to grace, even though he's graceful with it. But it came down to the principles, the commands of the Father, the plan, or the purpose. And that is truth. That is God's reality. And he plants himself in that particular experience, and all of his experience, of course, with the truth. Mm-hmm. The truth of God. And that's how you make decisions versus, let's say, grace, which is more about compassion. It's about emotions, as we've been talking about, effective communication, and bringing both the symbol, the word itself, or should I say the vessel, the word itself, and then putting tone behind that in the sense of care and compassion and love. Bringing those together is truly the goal, if you will, because I want to communicate principles, but with a loving tone, in the sense that I truly care. It's not all about what I want, because I can go just the opposite. It's all about me, and I'm going to give you a tone that's very contemptuous, mean, unkind, and you can have all the truth you want, but that tonality or those nonverbals turn it upside down, and now it becomes false. It's no longer true. It's not God's reality, because he wants both grace and truth. That's where I was trying to get to.
Well, and that takes me to a place where something I have a pet peeve about, and that is the lack of the ability to effectively communicate over text messages, personal messages on Facebook, things like that, because yes, you're sending the words or the truth.
Yes.
But there's no grace with it, because there's no tonality, there's no facial expressions or body language to go with it. So if you're sending that to me, now I have to put my own tonality to it and my experiences are different. The way I've been created is different. So it's going to be different than what you would have put.
Oh, absolutely. Because as we know, words basically provide about 6% of communication. We know that at this point, science, where everything else, tonality, nonverbal, gives us the rest of that picture. And when we're texting, now you can be creative. So I do appreciate the emojis that are there, because that emojis emotions that help with that healthy emotional connection.
At least set a general direction.
Yeah, some tone with it. But at the same time, you're absolutely right, where we become so direct and we can give truth. But when you, let's say in an immature state, your voices, your relationships, your experiences are just whatever they are in the sense of being toxic, you're going to receive that word and you're going to interpret it with your biases. And so what happens is you receive that and you're like, well, what do they mean? Well, not what the voices in your head are probably telling you. And so it's so we have to stay neutral oftentimes with those those texts. You notice, John, I say very little with text. I don't like text.
Right.
Well, I do like it for what it is, but at the same time, it's like
It's
I'm
not
going to
for
be
having a conversation.
Yeah, it's just to get a quick point across and done. And not saying you could be very creative, and if you are a good writer and you know how to put those words in place to just like a message, but very few even think that way.
Well, and even just hearing the other person's voice, yes, you get more of it. For example, I just thought about this. Those who are listening to this podcast right now, they're hearing what you're saying. They're getting some of the emotion attached to it and all that. But yet they're not able to see you, to see your facial expressions, your body language, like I am right now looking across at you.
Yes.
So I'm actually receiving more of your message than they are. Than those who are just listening to the podcast, because there are those added elements.
Yes, and let's go one step further. Even with our Facebook Live, how many people, they experience us on Facebook, then they come to the service going, "Oh, it was good on Facebook," but my goodness, when you're in it, when the whole environment is that effectiveness that we go after with every service, they're like, "Wow, this is a whole different experience." Yes, because you have some elements missing when it's just even going over Facebook. That's people that, well, I get what I need from those TV evangelists. Okay,
very two-dimensional.
Yes, yeah. and very isolated and very set apart, and it's an easy thing to do as well. But what's better? Live, reality,
absolutely.
Being real.
Well, and that's been one of my struggles right now during this pandemic, where we have had to practice social distancing. And of course, meetings that normally we would have had with folks live, we've been having to do over Zoom, which is fine for what it is, but yet it's not the same as actually being in the room face to face with that other individual or group of people. And
one of the reasons I'm excited to be doing the service at church in the parking lot, we're getting closer to getting back to that normal element of who we are in the sense of our worship and just being together, because we go after understanding, togetherness, and influence, and we want to do that in the best situation. And of course, we know together, face to face is the best. It's just absolutely wonderful.
I want to back up just a little bit here. I've taken us down a lot of rabbit trails, but and I want to get back to grace and truth. And on Sunday in your message, you used an adage of spiritual glasses,
yes.
The lenses in spiritual glasses. Now, I was hoping that maybe you'd take a few moments and kind of walk us through that and what you said on Sunday.
When we're thinking of who we are and how we see things, I encourage people to use the practical glasses that you and I are wearing right now, in the sense of prescription glasses, because I think a lot of people fail to realize that grace and truth are two different lenses. Just like our practical glasses, there's two different lenses, and yes, they are independent in themselves, but they're not isolated. And yes, we can truly define and put boundaries around each in the description and what both are. But reality says this, of course, just like our practical glasses. We have one lens that is grace, one is truth. And then, of course, when we put those on, we get that clear focus in one shot. It's no longer two separate entities within themselves or in themselves, but they come together and they work, and we then can see clearly where we're going. Well, the same with the spiritual glasses. Now, the cool part is, which I thought the fascinating part was, just like with the human eye, we have to ask ourselves which one is dominant. And we know with no exceptions that all Christians, your spiritual eye now, that's where we step into God's kingdom, our spiritual eye that is dominant is grace. But notice, it's not the only one. In Jesus, and I'm going to paraphrase here, hopefully in a good way, Jesus said you don't need law or that truth, in the sense of when you put grace as the dominant element in your life, because then what happens when you truly are doing the best for you, for yourself, for the kingdom, and you are doing it with compassion, love, and grace, that truth is going to fall into place. It's not that it's not there. It's just going to fall into place. So, for instance, going back to the inter type of communication, I think of interstate here, when I'm traveling, let's say down 76 that sits right next to us here, and I have to travel 75 miles per hour, I'm not doing that because it's the law, or I'm doing it because I don't want a ticket. That would be the truth side, if you will, or if we're leaning too heavy on one side. I'm doing it because we came to an agreement that 75 miles per hour on this interstate is the best speed to travel together so we can get to our destination safely. And it's that acceptance, that safety factor, and that togetherness that is grace. And then, of course, you still have the law there, though. But it's the best thing to do. And yes, we can criticize. Yes, we can complain. However, the whole point is seeing grace, or allowing grace to be the dominant lens in the spiritual glasses that we wear, with truth right there with it. But whatever you focus on will magnify, and as you're moving forward, you're setting grace and truth where it belongs. You'll end up in a very satisfying and pleasing place, not only with God, but with yourself and others. Great
Living
commandment.
right rather than being right.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so many people are trying to be right when we just need to live right. And so, I didn't get this into my message, and maybe this is a good point as well when it comes to grace and truth. Whoever's listening, I would encourage you to perhaps get in this habit. I started this years ago, where every morning I'm asking myself, am I living to be right, or am I living right? And the way I've done this is I ask myself, or I can ask somebody else this question, Let me, good night, I'm messing this whole thing up. Let me bring that around. Let me give you something here that you can do with a friend rather than yourself. I was going to go there, but let me go in
Do a little
otherwise.
left turn.
Yeah. Let me do that, because this is the best way to understand grace and truth, I believe, in the sense of being right, and rather than, my goodness, John, I think we're can we start this all over again? So what I'm trying to say is this is what you need to do daily. Get with somebody. John, if I asked you this, if I gave you a baseball bat,
Okay.
or whatever, and I asked you to bash me in the face with it, well, I would hope you would say no.
Yeah, no.
Well, your answer, or the intent behind that no, would tell me if you're living in grace, or if you're leaning towards being right. Because you can answer that question. Well, I would ask you, why won't you bash me in the face?
Because I don't want to hurt you.
I don't want to hurt you. So is that grace, or is that truth?
That's grace.
That's going to be grace. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you can answer this: well, I'm not going to do it because it's not right.
Right.
Right? Or it's wrong. Let's put it in a more radical. How about if I asked you, the reason, this is going to be radical.
Okay.
The reason I'm not going to sleep with your wife, John, is because it's wrong. Yeah. It's not right in society. No, that's radical, right? Mm-hmm. The reason I'm never even going to think about it was radical, because you're not going to think that way, because it's absolutely going to hurt you. It's going to hurt the family. Yes, it's wrong, mm-hmm. But the more deeper issue is, I love you way too much. I love what we're all about way too much to cause that hurt and feed my own selfish desires, whatever that is. I know that was radical, but hopefully it was effective.
And you hit on something there that truth is surface.
Yeah.
Now let's dig down below that to the grace.
You have right and wrong, but mm-hmm. Really, I'm just living because I don't want to get that ticket. Mm-hmm. I'm just living because the consequences, and that's so immature. We got to grow up and really understand that grace comes from the heart. It comes from the deepest aspect, and we don't want to hurt you or ourselves or even the kingdom. So what do? We do the very best thing that we can do under that grace, with the truth following in place. And when you live that way, I think about you, John, before all my selfish desires and stuff. Think about it. You don't need law. Mm-hmm. It doesn't exist. And that's exactly what Jesus was saying.
Yep. And he came to fulfill the law.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, we've used up every bit of time that we have here today, plus some. We've borrowed some from somewhere down the road. But
let me come back so we're effective. Let me read those questions, or the effective communication. Let's make sure we're clear here, so we're not going to go in the wrong direction. So we both got what we want. The or both there is the goal, where we both have healthy experiences and emotions, if you will, where we're connecting in a tangible way. Can I put it that way? With tangible results. Because we made a deal, or we had some type of exchange. Number two, we've been understood from our point of view. We're listening to one another, and you can communicate it back to the other person. This is that feedback and the accountability piece we talk about all the time. And number three, the other person seems fine with the exchange. There's no indication, let's say, of uncertainty or anger on the other person's part. In fact, if you asked, they would say they got what they wanted too. Mm-hmm. That's effective communication. Now, one of the things that we've been kind of implying here and doing a little bit is, well, good information is relevant, is truthful, and it's clear. There's been points in this communication today that wasn't the intent. That wasn't the facts. So just to put this all together to say, okay, you can see how important those three effective points are in the sense of communication, but it also has to be relevant, truthful, and clear if we're going to truly be good communicators, because it all comes together. And so I think we did mention too, beware of the 3 Ds I implied there. I actually said the 3 Ds is differences, disagreement, and disorder. Right. Don't allow that noise to come into your experience and really destroy communication, because that's all it is, the devil coming in. And as we experienced 2 weeks ago, noise. Mm-hmm. Yep. And we live in an ADD, ADHD world, and the devil is doing his job well with that noise.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The voices in the head, as we talked about last week. So, well, that's going to be all for today. We will leave some things for you to think about, and in the along with the podcast here in your favorite players. So make sure you look at those and challenge yourself to more effectively communicate with yourself, with God, and with others. With being the key term there. So,
well, and I hope people had fun. We were playing around here a little bit. So thank you for being with us.
All right. Happy Mother's Day to all you moms out there. And join us again next week right here on the same bat time, same bat channel for Wonderfully Weird Living. Thank you for joining us this week on Wonderfully Weird Living. Get your own copy of Drake's book, Wonderfully Weird, by logging on to www.wonderfullyweirdliving.com. Also, let us know if you have any questions or comments via our email address, wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. For author and pastor Drake Hunter, I'm John Waters. We'll see you next time.